thank you so much. It's a real honor to be able to be on your show and share conversation. I've really enjoyed listening to other podcasts that you've done with others.
Thank you. I want to say congratulations again on the beautiful space that you call it the Newberry.
Well, so the building that we purchased is 30 West Potomac, but for 71 years, it was the J.J. Newberry 5, 10, and 25-cent store from 1920 to 1991. And so the building is known in the town and the area. Everyone knows the building as the Newberry. And so instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, somebody was like, you could call it the Roots and River Yoga building. And I said, yeah, but we're going to have 5 businesses in here. And so it's not just Roots and River. And it's been the JJ Newberry for 70 years. So let's just call it the Newberry. So the building is the Newberry. And of the 5 businesses that we have put into, that we've renovated this 100-year-old dilapidating wooden box into a up to code, beautiful, historically preserved building. The whole building is the Newberry, and my business, Roots and River Yoga, is one of the 5 businesses that now reside inside of the Newberry.
I love your yoga classes. So I did attend a few at the other location across the street, which I loved that. And then coming to this beautiful, new, expansive, magical location was awesome. I feel like not only do I leave feeling amazing, I feel like I learned something. I'm not just doing a workout. I'm not just doing a basic class. I learn about my body, about the fascia. You talk a lot about that in Chinese medicine, and you include readings and quotes, and it feels so immersive, but so educational. I just want to say thank you because I love experiencing that.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to hear that, to have that echoed back.
Yes. So nearly 3 decades you've been doing yoga, massage therapy, and the depth psychology. What first drew you to this path, and how has your practice evolved over that time?
Yeah, I first discovered yoga in my early 20s. And I guess if I'm going to be totally fair about my first exposure to yoga was my mom doing Lilius in the living room on PBS when I was a child. But of course, I didn't know anything that was happening other than whenever she did tree pose, I would run in and do tree pose too, because that's what all children want to do is tree pose. And then in my journey, the winding road of how you become what you are, my winding road actually started when I was pregnant with my son, Dylan, in 1990. And I started taking exercise classes for pregnant women at the local hospital. And at the time, I was a psychology or a counseling undergrad. And what I experienced was that I was struggling with a lot of depression. I think I had a lot of depression residual from my childhood that had yet gone unaddressed and unresolved. And so I was pregnant and I was struggling with all sorts of depressions. And I started taking this prenatal fitness class, and it was just a floor aerobics for pregnant ladies, right? But whenever I would take the class, in part because of the exercise and in part because of the community, it was so different than going to a gym because you were there with other women who were expecting children. In part because of those two things together, whenever I would leave the practice, I would feel uplifted. I would feel clearer in my thoughts and clearer in my mind. And I started, as a student of psychology already at that time, I started to make this connection that there was something really tangible about what experiences you have in your body affecting the quality of your mind, right? Yeah. And so that led me to become, it's a long road, but how I got there. But over the next 2 years, I took over teaching the prenatal aerobics class. And then somebody introduced me to yoga. And it was with a video. It was a VHS tape, and it was Eric Schiffman and a DVD. I think it was the first yoga DVD that ever came out. That was in Target, you know? And the teacher was Eric Schiffman, who people in the yoga world will know that Eric Schiffman is very beloved. But in 1992, 1993, nobody cared who Eric Schiffman was, but they loved Ali McGraw. And so Ali McGraw hosted this, like, let me introduce you to my teacher. And it was the first yoga video that came out, really mainstream like that. And I started doing those practices, and it took me a while to get through the sun salutation, but I had so much emotion when I would practice that I was like, there's something in here. I want to learn more. And that's kind of how it initially began.
You just continued exploring and saying, yeah, this works and this makes sense. And you felt it and experienced it and you're like, I want to do more of this. What led you to your career? This is what I want to do. This is how I want to help people.
A little bit of both. I mean, I think you're really tapped into like how these things work in this, as Carl Jung calls the crooked road of individuation. Like, how do you get there? So what happened for me is that, again, I was working with a lot of childhood traumas and depression, and I moved to upstate New York in Ithaca. My partner at the time was a PhD candidate at Cornell. And so we moved to upstate New York, and I started getting acupuncture, and the acupuncturist encouraged me to do more yoga. I was also enrolled in massage school at the Finger Lakes School of Massage in upstate New York, because I was, it's hard. Like, I skipped a big part, which was that I started working on my master's degree in clinical psychology and had some experiences there that within the behavioral psychology, that there was this, don't ever show your emotions as therapists, don't ever touch anyone. And I'm waking up to this connection between the body and the mind, and feeling that we're missing something by only talking to the brain, or only talking to and only it being word oriented. So I dropped out of my master's program and went to upstate New York with my partner at the time and enrolled in massage school. And at the same time, an acupuncturist had suggested that I try to practice more yoga. And I found a teacher. And honestly, I love to tell people this story, because the very, very first yoga class that I ever took, it was going okay. And then we were in triangle pose, and she said, pull this back, do this, do that, all these like micro adjustments. And then she says, imagine that you're squeezed between two panes of glass.
Oh, yes.
And it like triggered it triggered something that just made me freak out. And I started crying, and I ran out of the room, and I bawled my eyes out in the changing room. And I was just like, yoga's not for me. And then I told a friend, and she said, you have to go back and take Andrea's class. And I wish with all my heart I could remember what Andrea's last name was, because I would love to shout her name from mountaintops, because she was such a great teacher. But it was in Ithaca, New York. And maybe somebody here is still practicing with her in Ithaca, New York. I'm sure she can be found, but her name was Andrea. And her classes were dark and mellow, and she never ended on time, and they were wonderful. And that's when I started to realize that there was a cloud of depression over my eyes. And whenever I would practice, it's like the cloud would lift. I could feel it in my brain, but it was no longer blocking my vision. And suddenly everything looked crisper, clearer. I was in better mood. And then the cloud would start to descend after a few more days. And so I was just doing her class once a week. And then I thought, I wonder what would happen if I took class on Monday and Wednesday. I wonder what happened if I took class on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And I started realizing that if I stayed with this kind of practice and this kind of meditation, that I could rewire a traumatized brain. And this is before, this is the early 90s. Nobody was talking about this. It was just something that I was experiencing and intuiting, and I was very curious about psychology and the body. And so at some moment I thought, this is something that if doing it every day is important to me, then I should share it with people as well. And there was a point in my life where I was working, I had finished massage school, and I was working, using my massage as a doula. not in like a spa setting, but I was attending labor and delivery and giving massages and assisting people through the birth process. And I was also working as a freelance photographer, and I was also teaching a few yoga classes. And I was teaching a few yoga classes. Back then, there was no yoga teacher trainings. Like the only way you could get a teacher training is that you would go to Kripalu for a month, or you would go to India for a month. That was really the only options in the 90s. It wasn't until the early 2000s that Yoga Alliance really came online, and people started saying, "What's your certification?" And so in the 90s, you teach because your teacher goes on vacation and they see you as a dedicated student and they tap you and say, "Will you sub my class?" And so I started teaching because I got tapped, right? And so I'm working with all these realms of massage and the doula work and so forth. And so, but I moved to Venezuela in 2002. And in Venezuela, they were under a crisis not unlike our country is in now, where they had a president who was doing very bold and radical things that were shaking up democracy. And the country went on strike against the president, asking for a referendum, and everything shut down for 8 weeks. So grocery stores were only open for like 2 hours a day, and gas stations were closed and malls were closed, and everybody was just at home. So I got my first training for COVID, for the pandemic in 2000. And during that time, there were so many people who were distressed that I was like, let me start teaching yoga classes every day to give people in my neighborhood something to do other than watch the television. And at that point, it started becoming clear that this was my path, and the doula stuff fell away and the photography became a hobby. And since like 2002, I've been teaching yoga full time.
So I think we can definitely relate to your change in shifting from the clinical psychology, because we both got our master's in behavior analysis and looking at the person as just a form of behaviors. And when I first started in working in group homes, we couldn't share anything about us. Like you said, there was no emotion, no connection. It was just, you had to focus on them and they could talk to you. But as I think we went through our careers, it felt like something was missing. We're not just observable behaviors, but we have feelings and thoughts and emotions, and we all have this innate human response for connection, relationships. And there's lots of research around people who don't have positive relationships and how that happens. And so we have continually sought other alternatives and processes and therapies to really support the individual. And it sounds like you did the same thing. I in my research today, you got your master's degree in mythology and depth psychology, which I had to look it up, and I learned it's how unconscious mind affects behavior and mental health. And so share a little bit about depth psychology, what that means for you, and how you've been able to incorporate that into your yoga practice.
Yes, I always had it in the back of my mind as I'm continuing to teach yoga. And one thing I didn't touch on before is that during my massage training, it was in upstate New York, and upstate New York has really rigorous requirements for their licensure. And so I'm sure it's much more rigorous now than it was in the late 90s when I was in the program. But back then you had to take 200 hours of shiatsu, which is Japanese form of acupressure, and which is very similar to the Chinese medicine, I'm sure adapted from the Chinese medicine system of acupuncture. And it was in that training that I started to learn so much more about how the body works in relationship to the element and to the seasons and so forth. And I think that was so fascinating to me, because I used to, when symptoms would show up at certain times of the year, I could look to Chinese medicine and be like, oh, this is a common symptom if this is a challenge in this energy or in this organ. And that all the more brought that validity of the body and the mind being this constant interacting process that was not just interacting with itself, but it was interacting with nature as a whole and each other. And so the yogis have their own way of looking at it. And even though yoga was the medium in which I found to express, I found myself teaching yoga from a Chinese medicine perspective. And so how do we use the yoga postures and the yogic meditations to stimulate the meridian pathways and the organs and the emotions that the Chinese medicine system has talked about for millennia? And so that informed my teaching. And I found myself going like, oh, when these things would come up, I would think, oh, it's mine to work with, but it's also the season of that thing having challenging. Let's say if I was having a lot of grief in the fall, it would be, oh, I'm having grief, but also it's the season of fall, which is associated with the lung, large intestine, and everyone may be going through navigating realms of what they've lost in their life might come up more at this time of the year. And having that connection between the self and the greater community and the greater season was really speaks to what Carl Jung talks about in the realm of the collective unconscious. And so I was still the whole time as I'm learning these things, still being drawn, like I knew I wanted to go back and get my master's in psychology. I really thought I was going to do clinical work. And what I found is that when I discovered that there was a really cool program at Pacifica Graduate Institute in California, that they had this really neat combination between learning about Jungian psychology, but also seeing the role that storytelling and mythology and fairy tales and how images play into the therapeutic process. And that really resonated with me because of the Chinese medicine, because there's so much imagery and color and, the seasons and mythologies and stories that unfold in the Tao Te Ching or the I Ching that I found myself completely captivated by the Jungian approach.
It's definitely everything that you're saying. You witness that and experience it in your class with all of that background. And I feel like it helps me to understand so much more about my body and my mind and the environment when you are bringing the elements and you're bringing the Chinese medicine system into it. And I can also relate to you and what you said before about coming back to yoga to lift, that the depression away or the veil away or to bring back the light. Because I feel like throughout, since I took my first yoga class in 2000 and there wasn't a lot out there. And then I did my training in 2008, but that's something I've always come back to, like coming back to the light of yoga. Like yoga did something to kind of light me up. And so anytime I'm going through challenges or hard times, I know I need to go back to yoga and go back to that. Is there anything you recommend for people who want to bring more depth to their yoga, who maybe just have the physical practice? Because you bring so much to it. Is there anything people can do just to explore a little bit more, learn a little bit more, besides coming to your class? Definitely.
Wow. I mean, I think my initial thought is to experiment with different teachers. And so, of course, in different readings, I guess I didn't come with a good, I have a short memory when it comes to remembering titles and names and authors and things like that. And so my mind is seeing the cover of certain books and I'm like, oh yeah, that Traditions of Yoga by, I think his last name is Farley. It's a little thin book, little ways that you can see how the yogic practices or the Chinese medicine practices can serve you. But, like you and like me, it's finding teachers that you connect with and having the courage to try out different people's practices and to also say, yeah, that didn't work for me. And I love that. I want to learn. I want to try that more. There's something really special about practicing on your own and being self-led. And then there's also something that's really special about sharing practices in group and community. And I have found incredible benefit in my own self-study And I have found that I have grown exponentially when I step out and learn from other people. Some people I take classes with that I'm like, yeah, that's not a good fit, or I have nothing to learn here. And other places I'm just in, even my own, some of the teachers in our studio, I'm just in complete awe at their unique take on the yogic practices based on the road that they have traveled that's brought them to this moment of what they're sharing. But yeah, I do think that what's unique about the way that I teach, for me, it's just like, this is how I share how the practice works for me and my psychology. But it also seems to be something that touches the lives of other people in a unique way. And so I talk quite a bit in my practices. I try to keep my voice slow and meditative so that whether you're totally listening to me or my voice becomes part of the music and you can just tune me out, that is also lovely. But I try to bring in, like 4 or 5 times a year, I do like a 4 or 5 week session where we'll talk about, like, we're preparing to go into the spring right now here in the next month. So at the beginning of March, I'll offer my yin yoga classes in particular, and we can talk about what yin yoga is in a moment. But in my yin yoga classes in particular, where we're holding postures for longer periods of time, it's more meditative. I'll talk about, what does the season of spring symbolize? What does it bring in the natural world? And what does Chinese medicine say about it? What's the season of the liver and the gallbladder? And what are the functions of the liver and the gallbladder? And what do they need? And what do they express? Because things as simple as the tone of your voice when you're unconscious of it, or cravings that you may have, or your sleep patterns, all sorts of different things can play out with the seasons when your body is using its voice, which isn't words, which isn't going to write you a letter. It's not going to pop up with linguistics, but your body will speak up with sleep patterns and cravings and things that it's drawn to and things that it's pushing away. And to be able to tune in to say, okay, here's the season, here's the organs, here's the way the body might be talking to you. And it's uncanny how many people will come up and say, oh my gosh, I'm going through that right now. And I never even thought about it as being seasonal, or that that's a way that my body is trying to say, hey, I need some attention in order to bring myself back to harmony and homeostasis, right?
Yeah, the season like of winter and the darkness, I don't love it. It's totally has a big impact on me and my energy and my mental health and a lot of people. And there's definitely something to that for sure. I can definitely relate. I had a mentor that once told me, as a therapist or as a yoga instructor, you bring your experiences, your background, your influences, everything you've learned, your personality into your sessions. You can't separate different hats. Well, I'm going to be this therapist today, but I'm going to do this therapy. And then you create your own path into the therapy you're doing, how we work with kids, how you teach your classes. And I can really resonate with that. If you've taken all these things and incorporated it, and you show up as your yoga instructor, and you have to find that person that you really resonate with and speaks to you and moves you to where you want to go. So I definitely love that. You talked about yin yoga as a major part of your work. What is this? If somebody's new to yoga, I do yoga, but I don't know the different terms and the different values. So it sounds like yin yoga, it's more meditative, it's more longer holding the poses. What is it to you?
So a fun thing to consider is that just the name yin yoga lets you know that we're navigating 2 different continents, 2 different cultures. So yin is not a yogic word. It's not a Sanskrit word. It's a Chinese word. And yin represents that, like the yin and the yang. Everyone knows the black and white symbol, the taijutsu, which essentially is symbolizing 2 koi fish that are swimming in eternity, turning into each other. And one fish is black and one fish is white, but in the white fish's eye, it's black, and the black fish's eye, It's why I've got myself confused. That fish, that swirl is always turning into the other. And that which is more young is more active and more mobile and more solar and more rational. And the yin side is that which is more subtle and maybe more intuitive. And in Taoism, it's described as, the sunny or the dark side of the mountain. And as the sun is moving across the horizon, that shadow changes. So there's no ever any absolute yang or absolute yin on the mountain. It's always shifting. And that's true for us and our emotions and our activity and our rest and so forth. Everything's always in this oscillation, right? Creating balance. So yin is a Chinese term. Yoga is a yogic, an Indian yogic term. So yin yoga is merging the philosophies of Taoism and affecting the more subtle layers of the psyche and the body with a yogic approach. And when I learned about the teachings of yin yoga I think it was 2004, when I was introduced to, hey, there's this guy named Paul Greeley out in Oregon who has created this practice called yin yoga. Machelle, you should totally check it out, because he's created a practice that is describing what you're intuitively teaching, which was that I was approaching my yogic practice from a Chinese lens and thinking that I was a weirdo and people were going to kick me out of town, or at least out of the yoga community, because I was, mixing these things that in my thoughts had never been mixed before. But of course, many people have. But internet wasn't much of a thing at that time. And so someone introduced me to Paul Greeley. And so Paul is teaching about how do you approach the more subtle layers of the body and the psyche from approaching the practice in a different way. And so most forms of yoga are more muscular, even the gentle forms of yoga, because they have a quality of bearing your weight, maybe moving something in a rhythmic and repetitive way that is going to engage the muscles. And so many of the lineages, there's so many lineages of yoga that have come down to all these different ways of practicing. But many of the lineages will talk about hold here, support here, lift here, contract there. And yin yoga is done all on the floor. And the yin is asking you to get as subtle as possible, as relaxed as possible. Now, some people might go, well, that's restorative yoga. No, it's somewhere in between. So restorative yoga is when you take all of the stress of the tissue, stress of the joints and the activation of the muscles out of the mix in order to deeply rest and create a relaxation response. And so restorative yoga is going to bring in a lot of props and kind of get you into almost a semi-fetal position, but supporting you in different ways. And then you'll be guided into a place of silence so that your nervous system can dial down and repair. Well, yin yoga wants to stress the tissues within limits. It's a form of self-acutension or self-acupressure. And so it can work a lot like the meridian system, like shiatsu that I studied so long ago. But instead of having someone from the outside put pressure on areas of your body, we're invoking that pressurized or that traction by creating a pose that modestly tugs on the tissues, and then we relax. So the muscle will be affected. You can't get around it. It's all connected. But the longer you hold the postures modestly within limits, but with that little bit of stress, good stress, like a healthy tension, then it starts to affect the ligament tissue that's wrapping around a joint. And it starts to stimulate the more dense layers of connective tissue, the water-rich phases of the connective tissue, in which the meridian pathways of Chinese medicine have been teaching about for millennia. So we want to stress the tissues, but we want to relax. And so it's its own unique thing. And the target of yin yoga is to exercise ligament and fascial tissues. Muscle will be affected, but it's not our target tissue. And it's amazing at rehabilitating joint tissue and synovial fluid and people feeling good and light and having increased ease and range of motion in their joints. And it has, when we go deeper, we can talk about the secondary aspects of it from a more energetic perspective. It's so, I like to meet people in the physical because that's where they're going to go like, oh yeah, I can feel that. And then once they start feeling the physical benefits, then we say, let's slide in a little bit and talk about the more spiritual dimensions of the practice that might include poetry or storytelling and talking to the different realms of the psyche that are meaning making. I think when I think about Carl Jung and depth psychology, it's so much about meaning making and bringing up that meaning making from the hidden realms.
Can you speak a little bit about that? I've heard trauma and our stress and energetic blocks and all of that can be stored in our body, of course, but how does that impact the fascia system? And when you're doing yin yoga, are you able to release certain blocks? And can you speak a little bit about that?
Oh yeah. I mean, this is such a big subject. Let's see what comes out of my mouth, because we could literally go away for a weekend and we could talk and we would still never fully be able to understand what's happening here.
Yeah.
But the fascia is like a netting it's both a tissue, a structure, and a system. So when I'm teaching anatomy to budding yoga teachers in our teacher training programs all over the area, my friend Tara Lemariz and I are rolling out a 300-hour teacher training program this fall for people who want to go a little bit deeper. But so when I'm teaching anatomy to a group of people, it's so easy to use the example of like an orange or a clementine as an example of what's happening in the human body in a simplified form, but it's the same but different. And so the outside of the clementine, I like to use clementines because they have a lot of fascia. So the outside of the clementine is the skin. And as soon as you peel back the clementine, there's so much fluffy whiteness underneath the skin of the clementine, right before you get to the edible part that has the moisture and the juice in it. So you peel it off. We have that under our skin too. Last year, I had the good fortune of attending a human dissection lab. We had 2 donated cadavers and we went from skin to nervous system all the way down with scalpels in hand. It was amazing to see and kind of peel the body in a very reverent way. And one of the things that really stood out to me is that underneath the skin, it is very similar to that of like a clementine. It's just very fluffy. It's like a spider web sort of material, and it's connecting underneath to the muscle body. But what wraps around the muscle body is a different type of fascia, a different kind of netting. And kind of like when you get to the clementine that you can eat, that thin layer around each segment of the orange or the clementine is a very different fascia than that fluffy stuff right underneath the peel. And then if you were to look at a segment of an orange or a clementine, or if you're a meat eater and you see the silver skin that's wrapping around a piece of meat or dividing the muscle fibers, that's all part of the fascia system. It's a great net, and it's holding the water richness of the muscle together, but it's also holding all of the parts together. They say if you could somehow remove all the bones of the body, your body would look very similar as does right now, because the fascia system has that memory. Like the fascia system is creating the shape of you because it wraps everything. And between the layers of fascia is interstitial fluid. And so things need to be able to slide and glide in relationship to each other. So you don't have your liver sticking to your diaphragm or your heart sticking to your lungs. Everything has to be able to slide. And that's true in our movement, that our muscles, we have many, many layers of muscles. And in between the layers, we have interstitial fluid. And the muscle needs to be able to slide and glide in relationship to each other. There's been a lot of study around that muscle actually doesn't stretch. We use the word like, I'm going to go to yoga because I need to stretch and get more range of motion or feel better in my body. But the truth is that muscle fibers don't actually elongate and remember very much. Their range of resting is very small. And so when we gain range of motion, when we're stretching or exercising or doing yoga, it's not because the muscle fibers are getting longer. If they were, then maybe when we first started reaching down to touch our toes and we couldn't do it, and then 6 months later after our yoga practice, we could touch our toes, then our hamstrings would have gone from this long to like that long, right? And I'm showing like 10 inches to 18 inches or something. Well, we're not walking around with loosey-goosey hamstrings. What happens is that we've increased the viscosity of the ability of the muscles to slide and glide in relationship to each other. So when people are stuck and feeling that tension in their tissues, it might be because things are sticking together. And that movement of the yoga helps to break up adhesions and get moisture between so that things can slide and glide so that you can move further or greater range of motion with less injury and greater ease. So that felt like an important part to talk about with the fascia system. But the fascia system is also its own system. It's a structure, but it's also a communication network. And they didn't really understand that until recently. And so that you will be prepared for the next time that you're at trivia night and they say, what's the largest organ of your body? Do know that the skin was demoted in 2017. We all grew up thinking skin was the largest organ, but in 2017 or 2018, the American Medical Association demoted skin. So now you will win your trivia.
I swear that was a question recently on Trivia Night. I swear.
Did they say fascia or did
No,
they
they said skin, and that was right. But
oh, you have
so
to
it's not
correct them.
And if you go to trivia night and they say, because I was at a trivia night not that long ago, maybe last year, and they had that question and the answer was skin. And I went up and said, you are incorrect. Let's go to the mighty Google. And they had to switch and we got the point.
Nice. Awesome.
So then that lends to, as the Chinese and I'm sure the Egyptians and many other health systems that came long before us have discovered and then have been forgotten and are being rediscovered in modern times, we haven't been able to understand how it is that the body holds emotion that's not just in memory, somewhere in the superhighway of the brain, right? But what we're learning more about, and this is why I can't really speak to it because so much of it is unfolding scientifically, but people can talk about it from a felt experience, is that, like Bessel van der Kolk wrote in his book, The Body Keeps the Score. And it's not only keeping score in the thinking recesses of the mind, the body is an intelligent system and it's keeping score in the system of the fascia. And so part of the magic of the yogic practice or the acupuncture practice or the somatic practices that include talk as well as the body itself is that we have the capacity to tease out traumas and stories and things that have been held in the body and causing a disruption in the body. And if we get the sometimes we get the opportunity to take the yogic practice and people will say, I don't know why, but I cried through that whole pose. And sometimes you'll say, well, what were the thoughts coming through your mind? And sometimes people will say, oh, I had this memory. And most of the time people say, I don't know. I don't know, because whatever the intelligence of the body was expressing could have been pre-verbal or isn't making it up to the verbal part of the brain. But the body is discharging an emotional tension. So the next time you're met with that stressor, you may not be as reactive to it. So there's these ways in which we give importance to things being able to be named. And yet that is important. And also there's ways in which we navigate these realms in these kind of healing modalities like yoga or acupuncture, acupressure, and beyond, that the body is releasing in a way that it doesn't even have to make it up to be acknowledged rationally. We just start feeling better. And with ourselves and maybe our relationships with others, or maybe something that used to trigger us doesn't trigger us anymore. And I feel like that's somehow deeply connected to the fascia system. And there's a lot of people who are doing research on this. Some interesting books are like, obviously, Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score. And I remember I told you I wasn't so good with the names. There's a book that's called Fascia, What It Is and Why It Matters. I don't know that one is really interesting for reading like more about the fascial system, but I don't know that it's going to take us into the emotional realm. And then there's another book that I have in my mind, and I can see it, but I'm having a hard time remembering the name. But he talks more about fascia from an acupuncture perspective and how it does have a psychological connection.
It's all connected. And,
yes.
And I think one thing we've learned through doing this podcast, it's been a lot of fun, is how it is all connected. No matter where you're coming from, we have a lot of people sharing about the universe and energy and different fields, and it's all connected. You can't escape it. So that was a great.
The smile that I had on my face when listening to some of your other guests, I'm like, we're all talking about the same thing, about that things are connected more than we've been able to understand. And again, I think that previous civilizations have understood, but I think that we're relearning in ours. And listening to the other people that you've interviewed, we're all saying it from the same thing from our own personal experiences. And the modalities are also different, but we're all getting to the same thing.
Yes.
Yeah, because Chinese, they've been around for thousands of years. How do we not? We've been around 200 years. Like, come on, they have to know something way more than we do. And I love that you're incorporating all that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think I often say that like our culture is like a teenager where we're just like, I'll do it myself. I'll figure it out by myself.
Right.
And there's the elders have done it before. They've lived it. They have wisdom, but we don't want to hear it yet. But I feel like as teenagers, we actually maybe are about to turn 20, because I think there is this quality. I noticed that with my kids, it was usually, my daughter was always very like, Mom, tell me more. Like my daughter was always just very intrigued with how I approach the world. Whereas sometimes my son was like, I'll do it myself. But it wasn't until he was in his 20s that he started turning around and going like, so what did you say about that thing again? And now that my kids are all in their 30s and their late 20s, it's so sweet to see that reverence that they have. And I want to learn from them and they want to learn from me. And I think as a culture, we're in that same place where we have been such amazing scientific discoveries in Western medicine that can save your life in a crisis, but haven't been committed to learning more about how do we actually create health. Like Western medicine, we want to go that direction. If we're in an emergency and we need to have our life saved, yeah, it's not the time for your herbs. Like it's time for surgery or something. But at the same time, I think that when developing a sense of health, that these earlier systems, there's nothing like them. And I think that our culture is starting to listen. It's like we're maturing.
Yeah.
Finally growing up.
Yeah.
We don't have all the answers.
There's definitely a shift, I feel, and hope that people will be, moving into that.
Agreed. I mean, like even my general practitioner will say, that's really interesting. And she'll like take notes sometimes. As opposed in the past, they'd be like, adorable.
Yeah.
The guilt and the shame that we've gotten. Oh yeah, that's fun.
I had a doctor tell me, you're bright, but you're not that bright. I was like, oh, he's like, I've read all the studies. And then he went on to quote statistics and it was like, yeah.
I'm going to hear about running a business. Being an entrepreneur is hard, and the wellness industry is extremely hard, and the new fads that come up all the time, and the different diets and the medicines and whatever. But what's the biggest obstacle you've had to overcome or face on a daily basis, and how have you overcome that or managed that?
It's such a great question. I don't know that anyone's ever asked me that. I think my first thought, that the first thing that comes to mind is, I often think of myself as the turtle that wins the race. It's like just you stay on this thing that's working and don't get to, I mean, of course I get distracted all the time, However, keep doing the thing that you love and what you believe in, and all those other things will fall away. I definitely fell into the trap a few years ago as the social media aspect started to grow. And I had just been a humble yoga teacher, and my classes, I've been teaching yoga as my profession for 26 years. And it wasn't until a few years ago, and the studios that I've owned a studio in Indiana for 6 years. And then I moved here and into Maryland, and I started just teaching workshops at different studios and then teaching some regular classes at certain studios, but mostly just touring around and teaching in people's yoga teacher training programs and offering workshops on Chinese medicine and yoga and the yin yoga practices, and then anatomy. And that's a whole other subject about like talking about how everybody is built differently and how their body's put together and how there is no one correct alignment for any yoga posture other than the correct alignment for your body. But I think what happened for me a few years ago with all the social media stuff that was happening is that suddenly I felt that one couldn't just rely on word of mouth. You had to get out there and do social media posts. And that's just not how my brain is wired. And so that came with a lot of hardship and judgment, and definitely distracted me from my path for a little bit as I was trying to figure out, like, how do I keep up with social media and be relevant? Which then started another question. I even have a girlfriend she's a writer named Marianne Wilburn, and she's a gardener, and she writes articles in magazines and books on gardening, and she's a fabulous person. And we would meet and have dinner, and one of the topics we would talk about is like, how are we navigating social media as entrepreneurs? And I kept saying, what does it mean to be relevant, and why do we care? And I've wanted to write like a broader like op-ed piece about relevance and how we fall into this trap of like, why do we want everyone to know who we are? And so that distracted me for a little while, and I was really struggling. And then at some moment, I just started letting it go and saying, go back. Word of mouth will build your community. You don't have to focus on the whole world. You focus on your community and keep offering what you do to the community, and everything will work out. And so yeah, I think that's been the biggest hurdle as an entrepreneur. I used to just only be, only I was the teacher and the brand of sorts, if you would say. And now our studio has grown. I had this vision of owning our own property so that we would be investing in the real estate as well as offering our services. And as someone who loves to teach yoga, has stepped away from what I thought I was going to be doing, which would be clinical psychology, I've stepped away from offering massage, but I really value all of those practices. And so I had the vision of creating essentially a wellness center where all other people could do those things that I value, that I don't have the time to do myself, so I could focus on what I do best, which is my teaching. And so we bought this 8,000 square foot, 100-year-old rotting wooden box in downtown Brunswick. And my husband and I nearly killed ourselves trying to revitalize it, mostly on our own. Of course, we brought people in for electric and plumbing and HVAC and things like that, but most things we did ourselves. And now we're open, and now we're starting to exhale, and it feels amazing. But in our building, we have massage therapists, and we have Reiki practitioners, and we have a full-time acupuncturist, and we're building our clinical social work and psychologist team. And so you can come and get yoga, but you can also find these other services that I think are really, really important to peeling the onion layers of the therapies that help us to evolve, that have been helpful and meaningful to me. And so that comes with its own complications, because now I'm not just governing myself and what I want to talk about in classes. Now I'm making sure people have their leases and that their room has everything that they need to offer their services. And, it's a lot of different details and tasks and people to communicate with. And it's a beautiful thing. But I'm hoping that once everything gets rolling, that I can just go back to being a simple, humble yoga teacher who loves to talk about storytelling and medicine and yin yoga.
You got a team now, and we're all unique and bring our own challenges, and managing people and time and schedules and all that is can often has taken me away from what you really enjoy and what I enjoy, working with kids. And but I wish you luck, and you got the vision, and you're finally here. I'm not trying to discourage you, but I'm just saying, like, yeah, it's hard.
As many times that Eric and I have gone, like, look at what we've done, and then we've gone, what have we done? But I have to say, we've been really discerning with who joins our team. And I'm just so impressed with every amazing soul that's already joined our teaching team and joined and offering treatments and services. And we're just navigating this beginning time because the new building has only been open for a month. And so I'm sure that in a year from now, people keep asking me, like, what are you and Eric going to buy next? What are you going to renovate next? Because we've done such a great job. It's been really pivotal for the revitalization of our downtown area and for other people to be willing to invest in downtown because they've seen what we've done. And yet, even though we've honed all this skill and experience, people say, what are you going to buy next? And I say, I want to leave it. I want to step into my contemplative life. I've done all of this so that I could step into my contemplative life.
Yes.
How long did that process take from buying the building to opening?
From when we bought the building to when we opened, it was 2.5 years, and we were here nearly 7 days a week. But there was the process that came before the building purchase, right? And that's a longer story of working towards, like, looking for places, making offers on places, not getting places, things falling through, getting approved for a loan, and then COVID hits, and then getting the loan unapproved because of the insecurity of the time. And so the whole process was probably 6 years.
Wow.
Impressive. Good for you. Sticking to it.
Yeah.
Following it. This
That's
turtle,
awesome.
right? The turtle wins the race.
Turtle wins the race.
Every time I get distracted and overwhelmed and whatever, I'm just like, be the turtle the turtle that wins the race. Just keep your pace, slow it down. Remember what's most important to you. You don't have to be the hare and run ahead. Just keep doing what you're doing. Just keep swimming, as Dory said, right?
Yes. Just one more step forward. That's great.
What are some simple things people can do, or recommendations you have for people to be less stressed out or be less disconnected and just slow down and be more connected with their body and their world?
It's such a good question. I think so much of our nervous system is tied to our breath. Even in the yogic teachings, the teachings of the Panchakoshas, they say that what sits between the body and the mind is the breath. The breath is the tether, the anchor between the thoughts and the body sensations. And so breath is always going to be is always going to be a recommendation. Though, of course, when a nervous system is really overstimulated, sometimes something that could seem simple as feeling your breath can be overwhelming. And that's maybe a story, a dive in for another day. But if one is looking to deregulate, to bring the nervous system down to a quieter space, one helpful breath technique is breathing into a count of 4 and breathing out to a count of 6. Allowing the exhalation to be longer than the inhalation is a powerful tool, because the inhalation is being governed by our sympathetic nervous system. That is more like the part of the nervous system that is more alert and making sure that you're safe. Whereas the parasympathetic nervous system is the side of the nervous system that allows the body to feel like it's in a state of trust and it's safe, and it can be in alone with itself safely or be in interaction with others and feel safe and comfortable, right? And so the exhalation guides are the parasympathetic system guides our exhalation. So whenever one can offer like a bit longer exhalations than the inhalation, that can start to dial things down. Things that are powerful is calming music that has positive lyrics, music that has no lyrics, progressive relaxations. I know that for me, when I have trouble sleeping, I like putting on a few people that I have on Spotify that basically like talk you through like relax your toes, relax your feet, relax your ankles, and walking you through your body, sometimes from an external voice, and sometimes if you can do it for yourself. You know, a yogic practice doesn't have to be 90 minutes or 75 minutes, though there's something really, really powerful when you can give yourself that longer period of time to practice, to really dial the nervous system down. But like on my YouTube channel, I have this 6-minute practice called the Makahos. And it's just 6 movements that you can do connected with your breath that are linked to the 12 major meridian pathways of the body. So it's called a Makaho. It's Makkoho. And it's just 6 movements that you do to stimulate all the organ meridian pathways of the body. You take each movement for 6 breaths, and in less than 6 to 10 minutes, you've done a whole body practice. And a lot of my students say, I call it my hotel yoga practice, because you can do it without having to get down on the floor. I mean, without like it being a long time if you're on vacation or traveling, or if you're just like, you don't have time, but you want to give 10 minutes to yourself. So yeah. I don't know. What else comes to mind? What comes to mind for you? How do you dial yourself back to a more calm place?
Yeah, I could definitely relate. I think there's so much to breathing, and there's so many books and things I'm hearing now in the Ujjayi breath and the box breathing and all these different things. And there's a book that you read, or have you read? It's breath something, breath work, or breathe. Yeah, yeah. I think we're just getting to, like you said, the initial of what breath work can actually do. Oh, what do? I always go to the gym, helps. Obviously try to meditate. Music helps. I listen to Jonathan Goldman on, even when I'm at the gym, you know, no words. It's just these sounds and vibrations that supposedly calm my nervous system.
You know, and I want to acknowledge that going to the gym is a form of yoga, right? Let's talk about like yoga is when you can unify your mind and your body and your breath. So when you are taking a walk and you're feeling that you're walking and you're tuned into your breath, or if you're lifting, you know, if you're doing bicep curls and you are connecting your mind and your breath with the movement, that's yoga, right? It doesn't mean downward dog. It doesn't mean sun salutations. So we can go to the gym and go through our exercise completely mindlessly, right? And be off here saying, you know, what I should have said to so-and-so when they blah, 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 right? Or we come into that meditative awareness of like, I am bicep curling. I'm going to connect to my breath. I'm going to witness where my thoughts go. That's a form of yoga. And so I remind people that yoga doesn't have to be done on a mat. Yoga is when yoga doesn't even have to include anything that's an exercise. If you're feeling your body and your breath and your mind, there's many people who have amazing yoga practice that they never do the asana or the posture practice, right? So I love that going to the gym is one of your forms of yoga.
You mentioned I'm definitely in the moment and present when I'm working. I'm not worried or thinking about other stuff. My mind is present. I think maybe that's why my body is more relaxed after I'm done, but I'm definitely present and not worried or thinking about a lot of other things. It's definitely mindfulness for me.
That's that opportunity to discharge the emotional tension that are held in your body. And sometimes it comes up to your mind to be like, oh, I can feel that I'm feeling the stress of that situation. Or it's that you're exercising, you say, I don't know why, but I just feel so much better about life. And that's the power that the body has to regulate itself, even when it doesn't make it up to our conscious awareness, right?
Well, definitely try to bring that mindfulness practice to my everyday life. As you mentioned, it doesn't have to be within the asanas, just even doing the dishes or being with my kids, trying to bring that union together with the breath, with my mind, with my present moment awareness. So that's something I'm always trying to, not always, but it's a process and it's a practice that I keep coming back to, right? And trying to come back to that noticing and awareness. But I go to the gym. I love to go to the gym. I love to practice yoga, walking.
You do a lot of journaling.
Yeah, I try to include a journal practice in the morning and in the evening, like reflection and that kind of thing, to help me ground myself and what's important to me. And I'm trying to think.
Bree really wants some airtime.
She really wants to.
Well, and I think about like the works of Thich Nhat Hanh or even the Dalai Lama, where they say, you're essentially those practices of mindfulness, or what we could call yoga, is, they happen 100 times a day, right? Every time you re-anchor yourself, it's a practice of yoga, right?
Yes.
And so what I do is I'm just a medium. I'm just a guide to assist people to find those states of like, oh yeah, I remember who I am after I move like this and I breathe like that, or I hear these poems or these stories or this Chinese medicine, that they remember more about who they are, so that that's easier to remember who they are when we're not together and when they're often out in the world. And so I remember, I believe it was the Dalai Lama, I heard talk one time, and he says, yeah, we come into states of union hundreds of times a day. We forget, and then we remember. And when we're remembering, that's yoga.
Yeah, I used to attend one of Thich Nhat Hanh's monasteries in California when we lived there, and I would go as often as I could, and they would have a day of mindfulness, and the whole day was about coming back to that moment, coming back to that awareness. So you would do a walking meditation, you would listen to a talk, you would do meditations, you would have a silent meal, the whole day. And the design is just that, of like a yoga class, so that you can have that practice, but then also bring it back to your daily life and to have that. It was so beautiful, and I wish I could still go there, but yes, very far away now. But yeah, that's definitely the practice of noticing and awareness.
Thank you for sharing. And animals, like in Chinese medicine, they say when we pet animals, it's good for the lungs and large intestine, to like, it helps to release grief and build a sense of preciousness. So, even your cat plays a role in the yoga, right?
Yes.
And it decreases your blood pressure and your heart rate and all that too. So it's definitely,
all goes down.
Tell us, where can everybody reach you? You said you had a YouTube channel. Give us your website. How can people get hold of you, learn more, take one of your classes? Any of that?
Yeah, so probably, even though I do have a website called Machelle Lee, actually, what's my website called? So you can find me. I do have my own website that is simply michellelee.com. My name is spelled Machelle, and my last name is Lee. So Machelle Lee Yoga, michellelee.com. However, that website's just going to direct people to my studio website, which is Roots and River. So plural, roots and only one river, rootsandriveryoga.com. And that's where I list my in-person and online classes. We stream our classes simultaneously that are live in the studio. And then we also send recordings to people who can't attend the online class live, but sign up for the online class. And we're building a video library right now. I do have a very mediocre YouTube channel. It's also Roots and River Yoga, but you can find a beautiful explanation of the makahos there and the shorter practice, as well as a few videos. We plan on building that out more in the next year or two to have, or in the next, I would say, several months, to have more yin yoga and gentle and vinyasa practices listed there.
I love it. And I can definitely appreciate that. And that has brought you to this place, and I think it will continue to grow, and you'll have your tribe and people will follow you.
We have a robust tribe, so we're really blessed with a wonderful community. Not just here in Maryland, we've got students all over the world. because I've lived so many places and met people along the way teaching yoga at every place I've ever lived. And so we've got a really amazing community that stretches beyond my mind can grasp.
Love it. Love it. Well, congratulations to you. Continuous success. Thanks for your time. And I look forward to taking one of your classes soon.
It will be amazing. I look forward to sharing practices with you too, Brian.
All right. Thanks, Machelle.
Bye.